My parents moved to this farm in the mid-20s, just prior to the Depression. And I was born in 1931 during the Depression, so it was a hardscrabble time for my parents, making a go of it here, as it was for all the farmers in this countryside. So as a young kid, I would go down in the marsh and bring back a few ducks or a few pheasants or whatever, and felt like I was really making quite a contribution to the survival of this farm. I remember my dad telling us that it's important not to over-harvest. You know, if you want a pheasant to eat, fine. If you want some venison, take a deer. But he always emphasized the fact that you don't want to over-harvest any of these animals. They have a part to play, and we simply need them. We just use what we can, and the natural reproduction will take care of itself to replenish them. Years ago, I used to see prairie chickens which migrated short distances. Years ago, I'd see prairie chicken flocks coming out of the north and passing over this marsh bed and passing over the farmyard. In fact, my brother shot a few prairie chickens that I can remember, so I was a part of the prairie chicken scene years and years ago. But they, of course, have been non-existent here for years in this area. Even as a kid of 5 or 6, I was continually drawn to the marsh, would go into the marsh, put on some boots, and grub around, looking at the plants and the animals, and got a real good sense for the ecology of that marsh at a very early age. I think my dad was ahead of his time in looking at the farm as a whole. I think he actually saw the farm, even though he didn't know what the term meant, I think he actually saw the farm as an ecosystem. And he believed in a healthy ecosystem and very much related to everything that was going on the farm, both domestic animals and wild animals. In those days of more diverse farms, people made a living by raising diverse crops and livestock. And you can say that the same thing happens in nature. The more diverse something is, the more stable something is. People would come with their horses in teams to an individual farm to thresh out the grain. So it was a lot more community-oriented. And we all shared doing things together, spent a lot more time together. The initial drainage started in 1910, believe it or not, and that was done with a horse-drawn dredge. That enterprise was unsuccessful simply because they didn't have the big machines.
They didn't have big machines, but later they would. In the 1960s, old systems were lined with tile for faster drainage, and new systems tapped into old ones.
When they did the job with these huge machines, they also used dynamite. So they would dynamite these trees along the ditch, some of which ended on the roof of our barn. I mean, you'd hear this huge dynamite blast, and part of a huge tree would land on the barn roof. It was like war.
I think his heart was broke when the marsh was actually drained. And I think he'd do anything and everything possible to see it restored. And he doesn't mean it to be against farmers or anything. He's doing it truly just because in his own heart, that's what he wants to see done.
The more I thought about it, being I was virtually helpless to do anything about stopping the drainage, I thought the least I could do would be to expose it to a wide audience. The film was finally put together in the late 60s. And we decided at that time to hold it until 1970 for release. So it was released in the neighborhood, at least, of the first Earth Day. We entered a number of festivals, and it won awards in 6 or 8 festivals, including New York, Washington, D.C., Berlin. So it got a wide amount of coverage. It was shown on TV several places, and that got the film out there for the public to see. And I don't think a lot of people realized that that sort of thing was happening to the wildlife, and from the wildlife's perspective, you might say. I don't think they made the connection, really, until that time. I get some feedback every once in a while about a marsh being saved. But ironically, this marsh has not yet been saved. The one that I filmed being devastated. Well, the impact of Cry the Marsh on my neighbors is largely unknown because I haven't really spoken to them about the film, and they haven't spoken to me about the film. But I'm sure they feel that what they're doing is more important than the marsh existing as a marsh.
When I first saw Cry of the Marsh, the film, it's just so sad because it's such a common story. It's a common tragedy that it's been repeated over and over and over again. Now, Bob was one of the few that took the time to document it and to do something about it. But it's a story that's been repeated thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times. And it's just inherently sad, I guess, to me.
I understand that people do have to make a living on a farm, and sometimes it's hard not to farm, even if it means destroying a wetland. But I think there are other ways of gaining income, and people are finding there are other ways of gaining income from a farm. And some of the farmers, of course, have a lot of land and probably could use a little diversity in the land as well. So if they're not struggling, it's hard for me to understand draining a marsh and destroying a beautiful, diverse ecosystem.